What if I told you there is a chapter in the Bible that most Sabbath keepers refuse to talk about?
Welcome to Reclaiming My Identity, where faith, history, and truth come together. Through engaging teachings, insightful interviews, and thought-provoking discussions, we challenge traditional narratives, uncover biblical truths, and explore historical context to better understand who we are and who we were created to be. This is more than just content. It's a journey of discovery and empowerment. Whether you're here to deepen your faith, explore your heritage, or seek truth, you're in the right place. Subscribe now, and let's reclaim our identity together.
Welcome back to the channel, Reclaiming My Identity. We have been unpacking over the last several videos. We have been unpacking and explaining the Sabbath. And we've been looking at this thing from different angles. We've talked about the importance of the Sabbath. We've looked at the Bible and we've learned that it was a day that Jesus kept. We've learned that it was a day that was kept after Jesus died. We learned that the Sabbath is a day that ought to be kept in heaven. We also learned that on the Sabbath, Sabbath is about liberation. We learned that there were yearly Sabbaths where every 7 years your slave got to rest. Every 7 years your debt was forgiven. Every 7 years your land got to rest. And so Sabbath, not just the Sabbath, but Sabbath itself is about liberation. Is about liberation. It's about setting things and people, most importantly, free from the burdens that they've had to carry throughout the other 6 days. And so in this particular video, we're going to be unpacking the one chapter in the Bible that most Sabbath keepers never talk about. They typically talk about, Sabbath keepers talk about the rest aspect, and they point to Exodus chapter 20 and verses 8 through 11, how we shall remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you should not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So they will quote that. They'll quote Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verses 12 through 15. But this one particular chapter, above all of the other quotes when it comes to talking about the Sabbath, this particular one, very little people seem to talk about it. And so that's the chapter we're going to talk about today. And that chapter, that book, is in Isaiah. It's Isaiah chapter 58. And we're going to begin in verse 1. Isaiah chapter 58. And we're going to begin in verse 1. And we're going to see what the Bible has to say. Now I'm reading here. This is the New King James Version. I'm reading from Logos Bible study software. And it says, "Cry aloud, spare not. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Tell my people their transgression and the house of Jacob their sins." And so Isaiah is beginning with chapter 58, and he's saying to this, better yet, this is God telling him to cry aloud, to spare not, to not make this thing no, don't put this in a corner. I want you to talk about this from the rooftops. I want you to scream this from the rooftops, because I want my people to hear this. I want my people to understand this. He said, I want you to tell my people their transgression. I want you to tell them their sins. I want you to tell them how they have fallen short. Tell them how they have missed the mark. He says, in the house of Jacob their sins. He says, yet they seek me daily. They seek me daily and delight to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. So these are individuals who are seeking God daily. These are individuals who are, we would think, who are trying to live right by God. They're trying to do what God has called for them to do. And he's saying that they seek me daily. They seek me daily as a nation that did righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. They ask of me the ordinances of justice. So they're asking me what it is that I would have for them to do, what it is that I expect of them. He says they take delight in approaching God. So they love coming to church. They love spending time with me. They love going through all the motions and doing all of these things that good, quote unquote, Christians or good believers should do. And I say believers, not just Christians, but also those who are Sabbath keepers who may not be Christians, because we know that there are those who are Sabbath keepers who are not Christians. A lot of my Black Hebrew Israelite brethren are also Sabbath keepers. And so this text here in Isaiah 58, it doesn't just speak to those who are Christians, but also speak to those who are Sabbath keepers in general, those who may be of the Black Hebrew Israelites or any other faith community. He says, they ask of me the ordinances of justice. They take delight in approaching God. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen? Why have we afflicted our souls and you take no notice? You see, so the children of Israel, what they would do is they would fast 3 times a year. They would fast on the Day of Atonement. They would fast for the destruction of the temple, and they would fast for the killing of the governor Gedaliah. And so they would fast 3 times a year, but the only fast that God required was the Day of Atonement. That's the only fast that God required. And so the other 2 fasts, there was nothing wrong with these fasts. It's just that they thought that by keeping these fasts, they are bringing us closer to God. That's why they're saying, why have we fasted and you have not seen? Why have we afflicted our souls? Why have we denied ourselves and you take no notice? So we're going to church. We're doing all of these things. We're going through the motions and you're not paying us any mind. You're not paying us any mind. We're doing all of these things, but you're not paying us any attention. He says, why we fasted, they say, and you have not seen? Why have we afflicted our souls and you take no notice? Then God says, in fact, in the day of your fast, you find pleasure. In the day. Now I want you to notice that he says in the day. All right, because we're going to unpack that day a little bit more in a moment. But he says, in fact, in the day of your fast, you find pleasure. All right. So in the day of your fast, you're not specifically doing what I need you to do, but you're doing what pleases yourself. You're doing what pleases yourself. He says, in fact, in the day of your fast, you find pleasure and exploit all your laborers. Indeed, you fast for strife and debate and to strike with the fist of wickedness. You will not fast as you do this day to make your voice heard on high. So he says, you're doing all of this and you think you're drawing closer to me. You're fasting on this day because he says in the day of your fast. So he's talking about a specific day that they're doing this fast. All right. That's important. He says, is it a fast that I've chosen? Is it a fast that I have chosen? In other words, is this what I have asked for? All right. Is this what I expect of you? All right. He says, a day for a man to afflict his soul, a day for a man to afflict his soul, to deny himself. Is it to bow down his head like a bulrush and to spread out sackcloth and ashes? Would you call this a fast and an acceptable day to the Lord? In other words, do you think this is what I've asked for? This is what I've asked for. Now, remember, like I said before, they would fast 3 times a year. 2 of the fasts, there was nothing wrong with the fast, but they thought that those fasts were bringing them closer to the Lord. They thought that those fasts were bringing them closer to God. And God was saying, look, is that what I've asked for? Is that what I've chosen? All right. Then he says, is this not the fast that I have chosen? Notice what he says: to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke. All right. So he's talking about this fast. Now remember, he's talking about the day, because he said earlier, in the day of your fast, you find pleasure. So this fast he's talking about is a day. All right. And he says, is this not the fast that I've chosen? In other words, don't you know that what I've asked for is for you to loose the bonds of wickedness, for you to undo the heavy burdens, for you to let the oppressed go free, that you break every yoke. In other words, what I've asked you to do is for you to minister to people in need. That's what I've asked for you to do. That's what I've asked for you to do. I've asked for you to set people free from the bondages, from everything that has them captive throughout the entire week. That's what I've asked for you to do. All right. He says, is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and that you bring to your house the poor who are cast out? When you see the naked, that you cover him, and not hide yourself from your own flesh. So he says, look, what I've asked for, I want you to take care of people who are in need. I want you to minister to people. I want you to show them compassion and love and kindness. I want you to meet them at the point of their need. And he says, is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and that you bring to your house the poor who are cast out? When you see the naked, that you cover him, and not hide yourself from your own flesh, not hide yourself from your own flesh, not hide yourself from your own flesh. In other words, not hide yourself from your own people, from your own people. Now, what's interesting is that when you go to, we're going to come back to Isaiah 58, but when you go to Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 11, Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 11, it says, to what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices to me, says the Lord? I have had enough of burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fed cattle. I do not delight in the blood of bulls or of lambs or goats. When you come to appear before me, who has required this from your hand to trample my courts? In other words, so he's saying basically here in Isaiah chapter 1, he's saying the exact same thing, basically what he's saying in Isaiah 58. Who has required this of you? Okay, now we know that God wants it, God requires it, God is pleased by it. Okay, but the problem is, once again, they were thinking that that is all they needed to do, that was enough. All right, he says, bring no more futile sacrifices. Incense is an abomination to me. The new moons, the Sabbaths, and the calling of assemblies. I cannot endure iniquity in the sacred meeting. So the new moons were the when they would celebrate the beginning of the month. The Sabbaths. He's not talking about the Sabbath day. He's talking about Sabbaths plural. All right, Sabbaths plural, meaning, okay, every 7 years your slave got to go free. Every 7 years your land got the rest. Every 7 years your debt was forgiven. Also, when you turn to Leviticus chapter 23, you find that the Sabbaths he's talking about also is that some of the feast days, all right, would end up, they would take place on Sabbaths. Some of the feast days would take place on Sabbaths. And so when he's talking about Sabbaths, okay, he's not talking about the Sabbath. He's not talking about the Sabbath. When you go to Leviticus 23, you'll find that there are seven separate feasts, all right? And even when you look at the rest of Scripture, especially in the Old Testament, you see that there are 7 separate feasts, all right? 7 feasts. Those feasts were part of the, or better yet, the ceremonial laws, which were done away with at the cross, all right? And so he's not talking about here the Sabbath day, which is a part of the 10 Commandments, which stands forever. So the text says the new moons, the Sabbaths, and the calling of assemblies. I cannot endure iniquity in the sacred meeting. Okay, I cannot endure, your sin, your falling away, and the sacred meeting. You all coming together, gathering together. Your new moons and your appointed feasts. My soul hates. Have mercy. They are a trouble to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes. In other words, when you're asking for things, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. Lord have mercy. Now these folk have now you would think this is the problem. They are doing all of the things that you would expect believers to do, followers of God to do. But he said, I don't want none of that stuff. None of it. He says, wash yourselves, make yourselves clean, put away the evil of your doings from before my eyes. What's the evil of your doings? He says, cease to do evil, learn to do good. Notice what he says, seek justice, rebuke the oppressor, defend the fatherless, plead for the widow. In other words, I want you to minister to people in need. Minister to people in need. So not only do I want you to come into the temple, not only do I want you to come into the synagogue, not only do I want you to come into the quote unquote church, all right, and go through all of the motions and act as if you're holier than thou, but I also want you to minister to people in need. I want you to seek justice, all right? Who are those who are oftentimes in need of justice? There are those who look like me. All right. Those who look like me. Now, remember, this is Isaiah talking. God is talking as well. And he's talking to people who look like me, people who probably look like you as well. All right. And so he says, seek justice. Who are those individuals who oftentimes need justice? It is us. He says, rebuke the oppressor. Who is the one who is always under oppression? All right. Having to deal with the oppressor, people that look like us. All right. Who are the ones who are the fatherless? People that look like us. Fathers who are either locked up, fathers who are 6 feet under. He's talking about us. All right. He says, plead for the widow. Who are the ones who are usually widows? Widows are women, all right, who look like us, all right. And how are they widows? Because their husbands are 6 feet under, or their husbands are locked up, all right. Husbands are nowhere to be found, all right. So he's talking to us, and so he's saying, listen, here in Isaiah chapter 1, beginning in verse 11, he said, all of that other stuff you do, that's fine and dandy, all right. But what I'm really asking for you to do is what I need you to do is I need you to do good. All right. I need you to do good. I need you to seek justice, rebuke the oppressor, defend the fatherless, plead for the widow. I need you to feed the hungry. All of these things that you should be doing because you are a follower of the Most High. You're a follower of the Most High. So let's go back to Isaiah 58. Let's go back to Isaiah 58. All right. So in Isaiah 58, and it says, he says, and not hide yourself from your own flesh. Not hide yourself from your own flesh. What does it mean, your own flesh? What's interesting is that when you turn to Exodus chapter 2, and I believe let's see, Exodus chapter 2 and verse 11 says, now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. He went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So Moses was in the palace, all right, living it up, all right. But he goes out and he sees his brethren, all right. Now it's important that the text mentions his brethren. It mentions that twice, all right. Mentions it twice that these were his brethren. These were his own people, his own flesh, all right. His own flesh. What we have to understand is that in Isaiah chapter 58 and what verse is that? 7, 8, verse 7, and not hide yourself from your own flesh. We have to understand that these individuals who are outside of our church walls, outside of our synagogue walls, outside, who don't know the Most High, these are our flesh. These are our flesh. All right. He says, let me go back. This is the fast that I've chosen is not to share your bread with the hungry, that you bring to your house the poor who are cast out. When you see the naked, that you cover him, and not hide yourself from your own flesh. Then, in other words, when you keep the fast like I've asked you to keep it, all right. When you keep the fast the way that I need you to keep it, when you take care of people in need, in other words, he says, then your light shall break forth like the morning. Your healing shall spring forth speedily, and your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry, and he will say, here I am. In other words, see, you when you are keeping the fast, when you are ministering to people the way that God calls you to minister, and to be clear, this fast that he's talking about, and he's talking about the Sabbath, all right? When you keep the Sabbath the way that I have designed, intended for you to keep it, then your light shall break forth like the morning. Your healing shall spring forth speedily, all right? Your healing. Some of y'all sick because you're not keeping God's Sabbath the way he told you to keep it. And your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call and the Lord will answer. You shall cry and he will say, here I am. In other words, you will pray and God will hear and answer your prayers. He says, if you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and speaking wickedness. In other words, if you stop pointing the finger and saying, well, she's in that situation or he's in that situation for whatever reason, and I don't need to help them. All right. He says, if you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and speaking wickedness, oftentimes we don't want to assist people. We don't want to help people because of what we think they did to get into their situation. But God didn't say to worry about what they did. God just said to help them. He says, if you extend your soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, if you do that, he says, then your light shall dawn in the darkness, and your darkness shall be as the noonday. Now, this is deep. He says, then your light shall dawn in the darkness. In other words, you will be a light. You will be a witness to people who are in darkness. All right. And your darkness shall be as noonday. So what you're going through and it will seem to be like hard times, could be to others would seem like hard times. For you, it will be like noonday when the sun is at its highest. All right. And so to others, it will seem like, man, how is she or how is he able to deal with this situation? But for you, it's like, I mean, I'm all good because God is working that thing out. It goes on to say, the Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your soul in drought. All right. So he will take care of you even when you are hungry, even when you are in need, even when you see it seems like you don't have a lot. All right. God will satisfy you and strengthen your bones. You shall be like a watered garden and like a spring of water whose waters do not fail. Those from among you shall build the old waste places. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in. Now, what is a breach? A breach is basically a gap, right? He says, so you shall be called the repairer of the breach. So if you keep, in other words, if you keep the Sabbath the way that I've called you to, you shall be called the repairer of the breach. All right. The repairer of the breach, the repairer of the gap. What do you mean? It goes on to say the restorer of streets to dwell in. The restorer of streets to dwell in. Now, what's interesting is this. The Bible we know was written in the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. The New Testament was written in Greek. All right. When the Bible was written in Hebrew, you had what are called vowel pointings. All right. Vowel pointings. Now, if you notice here, you should be able to see this over here. This is a word, and you see these little symbols down here on the bottom, and you have this little symbol here, and you have this symbol right here at the top. Those are called vowel pointings, and they were not in the original text. All right, they were put in at a later date. All right, and so when you look at the word to dwell, which is this word right here, all right. I'm sorry, no, that's not to dwell. This is the word to dwell. All right. The restorer of streets to dwell in. All right. Now, I want you to notice it has these little vowel pointers, little pointing right here, pointing right here, pointing up here. Now, if you remove those vowel pointings, all right, and this letter right here that looks like a W, and this letter right here, all right, those two are the actual word. All right. This little symbol right here is kind of like a kind of what's what I look for? It's kind of like we have walking or driving. It kind of adds to the word. All right, and so this last two words or these last two letters or whatever are the root of the word. Now, if you remove these vowel pointings, that word right there is the same word as when you get here, it says, if verse 13, if you turn away your foot from the Sabbath. All right. Now let's click there. If you notice, it's the same word. So this word here, Sabbath, is the word Shabbat. All right. Shabbat. All right. Now, so you got that. Now, if you remove the vowel pointings, it's the same essentially as this word here, to dwell. So it should actually say, you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets or paths to the Sabbath. So in other words, if you keep the Sabbath the way that God intended us to keep it, we minister to people in need, We shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to the Sabbath. So we restore, we will help people get to the Sabbath. We know this to be true because in verse 13, he goes on to say, if you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, all right, from doing your pleasure on my holy day. Now notice he says your pleasure on my holy day. Now remember, we saw earlier in verse 3, he says, in fact, in the day of your fast, you find pleasure. In the day. All right. What day is that? He's talking about the Sabbath. He's talking about the Sabbath. So he says in verse 13, if you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day. So what is your pleasure? Your pleasure are all of the things that we do on Sabbath that we think are bringing us closer to the Lord. Now, like I said before, it's nothing wrong with going to church. Nothing wrong with that. Okay? Nothing wrong with not buying or selling. All of that stuff is fine and dandy. All right? But God says, look, what I've asked you to do is minister to people in need. I talked about it in a previous lesson about how when you look at the Bible, there are 7 different times where it mentions Jesus and the Sabbath. All right. All 7 times it mentions Jesus healing somebody on the Sabbath. Every time it mentions Jesus and the Sabbath, it mentions Jesus healing somebody, ministering to somebody in need. All right. Only 3 times does it mention Jesus being in the synagogue on the Sabbath or going to church on Sabbath. Now we know he went every Sabbath because the Bible tells us it was his custom in Luke 4:16 to be in the synagogue on the Sabbath. All right. But the Bible focuses more on what Jesus did on the Sabbath than where he was. We typically focus more on where we need to be, meaning at church, not what we ought to be doing. And so Isaiah is saying, if we keep your foot from breaking the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, all right, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of the Lord honorable, and shall honor him, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words. Now, typically we read that and we talk about we shouldn't be doing this thing, we shouldn't be doing that, we shouldn't be going to this place and speaking this thing with it, and all of that's well and good. I'm not saying that we should go to certain places or we should talk about certain things on the Sabbath, but the context of Isaiah 58 is not talking about that. The context is taking care of people who are in need on the Sabbath. That's the context. That's the context. But oftentimes what we have done is we think that because we have gone to church and all this other stuff, we have kept the Sabbath, when reality is, according to Isaiah 58, if we are not ministering to people in need on the Sabbath, then we have actually broken the Sabbath. That's right. We have broken the Sabbath if we have not been ministering, or if we're not ministering to people in need. We've broken the Sabbath. Now, this is the thing. Most people are not going to tell you this. Most pastors, no preachers, most Sabbath keepers are not going to talk about this. Okay? Because what do we like to do? We like to, we want to focus on the rest aspect. All right? We want to focus on rest. But if we're talking about really resting, then we have to do what he did. And what he did on Sabbath is he ministered to people in need. And that's exactly what he wants us to do on Sabbath. Minister to people in need. And so if all you do is go to church or quote unquote rest, because I know some folk may not go to church, some folk may not be Christians, but you keep the Sabbath. But if all you do is minister and feed yourself on the Sabbath, then you're not actually keeping the Sabbath. You are, according to the Bible, according to Isaiah 58, you are breaking the Sabbath. Breaking the Sabbath. And God wants us to truly keep the Sabbath day holy. He wants us to keep it holy. Keep it holy. If you have enjoyed this kind of content, I'm going to ask that you please like, subscribe, comment, share. And we will see you in the next video, Reclaiming My Identity.